Everybody, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. It's Dave. I just want to jump on at the beginning and let you know this episode is adult themed in the topic that we're going to be talking about. Not explicit, we're not going there in the actual episode, but I want to give you a heads up at the beginning. Small kids in the car, you're listening somewhere where little ears are around. I would suggest that you listen to this later. So Sandra's coming on to talk about trauma and some of the things that she's been through. Powerful message for you, and maybe for somebody in your life that you could share this with. But just want to give you the heads up at the beginning about what the content of this episode will be about. Okay, we didn't mark it explicit for many reasons, but we wanted to share this episode with you. So here you go. Thanks for listening.
Well, I can imagine a lot of people are going to be really triggered right now by the word forgiveness. Now let me start there. I never forgave my attackers. Never, ever did I do that. But they are not more than a speck of dust floating in the sunlight in my life. They have no room in my life. Now, forgiveness does not mean you have to forgive them too about what they did. No, forgiveness means you allow yourself to let it go. You allow yourself to let the story become just a faded memory and you live your life. A lot of people feel that they should never be able to forgive, and with that they keep the trauma alive. It's like a badge of honor or something. You know, like you're keeping it alive because it happened to you, and if you forgive, then it would mean the story is insignificant. But that's not what this means. What happened to you, the horrific things that happened to you are inexcusable. But it does not mean you have to carry them around like a heavy bag of rocks. You can choose to have the story be no significance in your life. The best way to find revenge, I guess, to put it this way, is to live the best life ever.
Hey everyone, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. I have a guest with me who is joining me from literally paradise. And it's so great to have my guest here today. Sandra Cooze is on, and we're going to be talking about her book, which I have, ta-da, right here. And Sandra's so kind to send a copy of the book, and it is great. My wife and I are wrestling this book from each other, and we're enjoying it very much. Sandra, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the book, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, you're very welcome, Dave. I'm so glad to be here. And I'm so glad you're enjoying my book.
It's amazing. And I know Jen and I are wrestling over it. She's making notes. She's coming to me all the time. She's like, oh, did you read this yet? Have you written here yet? She's ahead of me. And I love that. We're really enjoying it. It's such an amazing book. Thank you for being part of the show. And again, thank you for sending it. It's very meaningful to us to have a piece of you in our home. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
Great. So I mentioned you're from Paradise. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because people are like, what? What?
Well, I live in Newfoundland, Canada, in a town that's actually called Paradise. So yes, I'm living in paradise, literally.
And does it live up to the name?
Well, since we just moved here 6 months ago, I'm still exploring, but the island is most definitely the most beautiful place on earth. So much green, so many mountains. Right now we have icebergs float through. Soon the humpback whales are gonna come, and yeah.
The furthest I've been east for Canada has been Nova Scotia and around there, and some of the nicest people in the entire world live on that part of the planet. So I've never been to your spot, but it's on the top of my list. I would love to come there.
You should. So, especially in the summer.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit off the bat about your author journey, Sandra, and let's get people up to speed where we are at. Can you tell people how this all started for you to become an author? Can you take us back to the beginning there?
Well, I always loved writing, and I always loved dreaming up stories. Now, if you had told me 10 years ago that I would write a book about trauma healing, I would have laughed, because I always thought I would write a cheesy romance novel or something like that.
There you go.
Which still might happen, but it was not what I was drawn to. Writing a book on trauma healing started with my own healing journey. So to give a little bit of my backstory, when I was 12 years old, I was molested. When I was 14, I was sexually harassed. Between the age of 16 and 17, I was severely bullied in school. Between the age of 19 and 25, I was sexually assaulted multiple times. And with the age of 22, I was raped. And if that wasn't enough, after the rape, a couple of years later, I went to see a psychologist for help. And he dismissed me after the first session saying, I believe you already worked through it all. What am I supposed to do? Well, and so I had to find my own way of healing. So in hindsight, I'm grateful that whatever happened to me happened this way, because without it, I would not be where I am today. Because on my healing journey, I learned so much about what trauma really is, what really happens, what we have to do in order to heal. And this brought on the desire to really help people, not just through my business, but through writing. Because trauma just makes sense. It makes so much sense to me. And I wanted to write a book that makes sense to people. Not just, we have so many books about trauma healing, but they all sound so scientific. Mm-hmm. Right? They sound intimidating. So what I wanted to create was a book that is written for trauma survivors by a former trauma survivor, and really picking trauma apart in a way that is easy to understand and takes the fear out of trauma healing.
One thing as I'm going through the book is, I guess, in my ignorance, thinking that trauma is limited to a small group of people and that only certain people have lived through trauma, but then realizing that trauma is a pretty wide audience. It's more common than maybe I had given credence to, I guess, in the past. And that's something that I'm learning about myself, is that there's so many people in our lives that have gone through something that has marked them and shaped their journey, and being more aware of the people around us that have been through something, a traumatic event of some sort in their life, and just recognizing that, I think, is something that we can do as people who are supporting our friends and family that have been through a traumatic event, that we can be there for them. Can you expand on the side of the people here to support people through trauma? Because I think that's one side of the picture that we don't talk enough about. No, we don't. It's very true. Well, most of the time, people who live with people with trauma feel very helpless because they think they're not a therapist, so how can they help? Right. But really, most of the time when we're dealing with trauma, we just want to be heard. We want to be able to feel safe talking about it. So just so we know we don't feel alone. Let's take, for example, a romantic couple, maybe they're married. Let's say the woman has been sexually assaulted or worse, raped, and she's being triggered whenever she and her husband want to make love. Mm-hmm. And she's frustrated with herself, and she is worried that this may frustrate her husband and he may end up leaving her because she cannot get over this frickin' rape. Yeah. That's what goes on in her mind, on top of the trigger. But she's not talking about it because she's ashamed. She's worried. She doesn't want to share that because she feels it's not something you should share because it may totally turn off her husband. Right? Mm-hmm. And then you have the husband who has no idea what's going on, who feels like, well, maybe she doesn't want to have sex. Maybe I don't do it right. Maybe it's me. Mm-hmm. You see where this is going? Spirals, right? Exactly. On the other hand, if you were honest and would talk about it, just say so much as, something happened to me in the past. And this makes it very difficult for me to surrender into intimacy. Right. To really let go and enjoy. I can't. It's impossible right now. And as you talk about it, you can talk about what really has to happen in order to heal. It could be, well, for example, when we're being traumatized, especially when it's sexually, our home has been attacked.
our body is the only home we will ever have.
Right.
You can move apartments, you can sell your house and buy a new one, but you cannot switch your body out for another one, right? So your body is your home. And when you're being sexually assaulted or raped or anything else under the sun, your home has been attacked and you feel unsafe in your home, in your body, which means the control was taken away from you. So whatever happens was out of your control. And so a trigger happens whenever you try to surrender into intimacy because the body feels attacked, right? Because of the trauma that had happened. So there are things that we can do as the partner. First off, back off, hands off, right? That's the first thing, to recognize that your partner right now is being a trigger and needs to be in control. So if she says, or he, depending, says, stop, I can't, hands off. So that she knows she's in control. And then you could, for example, just say, all right, come on, it's fine, let's just cuddle. And you just relax and give her the safety that she feels safe. And sometimes this is all it takes to release the trigger and that she can enjoy being intimate because the trigger is gone and she's feeling safe. It's little things that a partner can do to help. It's not rocket science. It's just being open to the possibility of her needing to be walked through the trigger so she can release it.
Right. And I think that's the one thing that happens, Sandra, is when we are not having conversations as a couple, as partners, here for each other. We're not having that conversation. And then we get inwardly focused on what, like you mentioned, maybe it's me, maybe it's my fault. Then that creates gaps in the relationship, and silence fills the gaps. And in that silence, you start to drift because you're not connecting physically, you're not connecting verbally, and you start losing that intimacy of having each other and being together, right?
Exactly.
And that's a scary place to be, and it sneaks up on you. It's not like one day you're this way and then the very next day you're completely opposite. It's over a period of time that the silence gets louder, I guess you could say, in a relationship. And that is a scary place to be.
It is.
Right.
And when I think about it, all it takes is having the conversation. Conversations may be very difficult. They may be very intimidating. They may feel very uncomfortable. But if you love your partner, he or she is the best one to have the conversation with, because if you're honest in every way, it creates a new way of intimacy. Knowing who you are on level of your soul by bearing your soul to your partner, that's something so beautiful. It's vulnerable, yes, but out of this vulnerability is creating a bond between the two of you.
Right.
That can conquer anything. But if you feel ashamed or afraid to talk to your partner about something, ask yourself why. You shouldn't be. That goes down to limiting beliefs, our upbringing, and what our parents say, well, you don't talk about this and things like that.
Yeah.
This is a whole new spectrum, but it's all connected.
So tell me how Journey to Yourself, I'll hold it up again because I have it in front of me. Tell me how Journey to Yourself, how does this help us to create that safe place to have these conversations that are so hard to have as a couple?
Well, first of all, I'm very raw and honest in my book. And I share my story, even though that's just a very small part. So my book is not the story. My book is a part of it. I unravel trauma. I pick it apart. I give examples from my own healing journey, which I hope will help others to convey to their family or their partners their part of the story when they see how easily I write about mine and share it with the world. And some of the parts are where I felt a little uncomfortable talking about it. The rape, for example. Because I slept over. I had something to drink, even though I knew him as a friend for over 6 months. But thinking about society, they would say, well, it's your own fault. Right? And still, I was very honest and pushed through my own insecurities and said, no, just because I slept over doesn't mean you had the right to touch me. Or worse, because I never asked for it. There was never any sign that there would be any interest from either party in that regard.
Right.
So, but I'm very honest, and I hope that this helps others to communicate their own trauma, who maybe they can see themselves in my story, and this may help them see that they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And they can see that I healed, and so they can too, because I'm no one special. I just found my way in healing.
Right. Okay. So I was reading, one thing that kind of stuck out to me most recently was reading about how trauma affects us on all levels. And you talk about the physical level, the emotional level, and the mental level. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we fully grasp all the different levels that trauma affects us on. And we kind of maybe fixate on one level, maybe. Mm-hmm. But I like how you put that in there. Can you kind of talk to us about the physical level, the emotional level, and the mental level as it reflects to trauma?
Of course. Well, in the physical level, the body remembers. That's the physical trigger. That's the nausea feeling when we're being touched in places we don't want to be touched because we were touched there during a sexual attack. Let's put it this way. And the body is also sending signals that it needs healing. It could be fibromyalgia is a result of trauma. MS is a result of trauma. For example, because the body remembers and the body can't release because we're not releasing our trauma. And over a long period of time, this tension that we hold on to when we're being triggered and to suppress the trauma and everything can turn into those issues, among other things.
Yeah.
Then on the mental emotional level, we have depression, we have anxiety, we have panic attacks, we have OCD, we have the need to control, we have perfectionism. All of these are caused by trauma, unresolved trauma. Because when we're being traumatized, it happened out of our control. So we lose our sense of being in control. On top of our home being attacked, we feel we have no control over anything. That's where perfectionism comes in. Everything has to be perfect because we can control that. Mm-hmm. Or we have the need to control, or OCD, like the chair has to be in a perfect spot each and every time. Nothing of my knickknacks can be out of place, only a little bit. Mm-hmm. This need for control keeps us sane almost, but it's a fight we can't win because nothing will ever be perfect enough. Nothing will ever be in the right spot enough. It will just spiral out of control unless we start healing.
Okay. And that's the one thing that I think we don't talk about enough and we don't understand is just how all these are interconnected and they're not standalone levels, right? But they're all interconnected, right?
Yes.
Talk a little bit more then about, it's one thing to identify our trauma and to name it and address it, but it's another thing now to go on beyond that and not just survive our trauma, but now where do we go from here with our trauma? How do we thrive, and how does our life take shape, and how does our trauma serve us, I guess, in a way down the road? And where is this book taking us so that we're able to live past our trauma? Can we ever live past it, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can. I'm living it.
I love it. Okay, so explain to us that part of it then, because I think that's the other side of it, is we really need to have a sense of how can we get past this and how can we grow?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, once we're being traumatized, we're in the victim mentality, the victim stage.
Right.
Which means we are constantly in it. The thing is with trauma, when you're still in the victim stage, you believe it was your fault because that's the only thing that makes sense. Who would ever do something so vicious to you and
Right.
do it because they chose to do that. This doesn't make any sense. And so you believe it had to be you. It had to be what you were wearing. It had to be what you were saying. It had to be how you were behaving. There must have been something about you that caused this to happen because nothing else makes sense. This is the victim stage, and it can last for decades, sadly. But once we're moving past that, we get into the survivor stage, which means we have a little bit of distance from what happened.
Okay.
And we can look at it from a different perspective, and we see, no, it wasn't our fault. And then we get angry. We get so angry at our attacker for putting us through this. We're getting so angry at us for allowing this to happen, which is a slippery slope.
Right.
Right? Because the thing is, once you see as an adult what happened to you as a child, how could I let this happen? But this is wrong because you look at it from the mindset of an adult. You don't think about it from the mindset of the child that was living it. I should have said something when I was a teenager. Well, how?
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't have the mindset to do that. You were completely terrified of what happened. You had to make
Yeah.
sense of what happened. And on top of that, you would have had to have the mental capacity to choose to tell someone. How is this even it's not possible. So understanding that we have to heal the child within us, not from the adult perspective, but from the child's perspective.
That's an interesting point. You're right, because we're looking at it through adult knowledge, adult lived experience and wisdom and everything. Yeah. You're not looking at it through the eyes of the person at that point in your life. Right. Exactly. That makes sense.
If it were a different child, we would have compassion with that child.
True.
We would say, there was nothing you could have done. I'm so sorry this happened to you. We have to get you through this. But if it's you as the child you're looking back at, you judge yourself because you want to make this unhappen. You want to feel better. You want to let this feeling go. But unless you heal the child, this is not possible. Or it's very difficult because you completely judge yourself. So you have to look at it from a different perspective. You have to go back and look at it from a child's perspective and be there for that child within you to heal.
You talked earlier about the triggers and speaking about them and calling them out and asking for space in the moment with your partner. That's wise advice. How do we deal with triggers that seem to come out of nowhere in the future when we feel like we've worked through our trauma, but something comes and just kind of, we weren't expecting it, and here it is, it's back. How do we address the triggers and how do we work through those moments?
Well, triggers are a constant in your life. They get easier and easier. And once you start healing your trauma, the big triggers are gone. They don't come back.
Okay.
But then you have those little triggers from your upbringing, like, I don't know, something your parents taught you, like generational trauma, like how they taught you from their traumatized mindset. And how this suddenly clashes with the belief system of your partner, for example, who was raised completely different from you. And then you get triggered. But the thing is, if your partner knows how to handle your triggers, it's easy because they don't get absorbed in the trigger. They take a step back and say, all right, what just happened? What are you seeing? What are you feeling right now? What did I say that triggered you? Because they know that a trigger is not about them, but something that happened in the past and something they said or how they said it just triggered that. So triggers are technically pretty easy to release if we know how. Now, when I work through triggers, yes, I do get them too every once in a while. And my husband is taking the brunt force. But when I do that, I follow the trigger. So I basically ask myself, okay, what am I feeling right now? Because when we're triggered, the emotions are in total overload. We don't even know what we're feeling, why we're feeling. So first we have to determine what we're feeling. If we're feeling anger, anger is a mask for pain. Why are we hurting? What's the feeling of the pain? Is it resentment? Is it neglect? Is it ridicule? What is it? What are we feeling? Once we understand what we're feeling, we say, all right, why do I feel like this? And usually an image pops up from the past, like something that happened, like something our parents said that made us really feel bad, or in the classroom or something like that. And we say, all right, so I understand that. So where else did I feel like this? And then we go further in the past and think back to another incident where we're made to feel this way. And once we can understand the pattern of this trigger, we can bring understanding to it and we can release it. Because we know that this moment right now had absolutely nothing to do with what happened to cause this trigger.
Mm.
And it's simple trigger release. I've been doing this even before I went into trauma healing, before I knew what I was doing.
So I like the fact that you said it does get easier because
Yes, it does.
living with trauma without a resource like your book, for example, and your help, you don't feel like there's ever going to be an answer or they're going to lessen over time. It just feels like they're constantly in front of you. The other thing I really cued in on in your book is the whole idea around choosing forgiveness. And
big subject.
yeah, and like, does it strip the value, or sorry, not the value, but the importance of the trauma? Like it feels like does it diminish it over time? I just don't know. The forgiveness piece is important, but the trauma, I don't think, can be just wiped away as easy as a word. There's like a lived action that has to happen through this. Can you talk a little bit more about forgiveness?
Well, I can imagine a lot of people are going to be really triggered right now by the word forgiveness.
Right.
Now let me start there. I never forgave my attackers.
Okay.
Never, ever did I do that. But they are not more than a speck of dust floating in the sunlight in my life. They have no room in my life. Now, forgiveness does not mean you have to forgive them about what they did. No, forgiveness means you allow yourself to let it go. You allow yourself to let the story become just a faded memory and you live your life.
Mm.
A lot of people feel that they should never be able to forgive. And with that, they keep the trauma alive. It's like a badge of honor or something.
Mm.
You know, like you're keeping it alive because it happened to you. And if you forgive, then it would mean the story is insignificant.
Right.
But that's not what this means.
Okay.
What happened to you, the horrific things that happened to you are inexcusable. But it does not mean you have to carry them around like a heavy bag of rocks. You can choose to have the story be no significance in your life. The best way to find revenge, I guess, to put it this way, is to live the best life ever.
Okay. Yeah, because the whole thing about, forgive and forget, it's kind of hard to do in trauma because that forget part doesn't come quite as easy as maybe somebody took your parking spot at the mall. I can forgive and forget it, no problem. But this is something completely different. This is life change.
Exactly.
Right.
And forgiveness is not about forgiveness of what happened. Forgiveness means you allow yourself to let it go. Because in a way, while you're holding on to the trauma is holding on to you. So you're holding yourself hostage in the story.
Mm-hmm.
You relive it over and over and over again in hopes that someday it will make sense. It will never make sense. Because it happened out of your control. Someone chose deliberately to do this to you. Sometimes when I work with my clients, and I'm also being very raw and honest and direct, I don't sugarcoat things, and my clients like that for the most part. But sometimes I have to be really honest and say, look, he made sure you were alone. He made sure no one would disturb you. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Mm.
This was premeditated by him. None of this was your fault. To put it in perspective.
Right.
And they will take this to the grave, but you shouldn't have to.
Wow.
This was done to you, so you have every right to kick your trauma to the curb and live your life. Live your best life ever. Because once you've completely healed from trauma, you have such strong boundaries in place. You know exactly who you are. Your true authentic self. People will have an extremely hard time to ever traumatize you again because you're standing in your power. And that's trauma healing.
Is there a way to, as a parent, looking at the next generation ahead of us, is there a way to trauma-proof our family in a sense where we are now more aware of it and we can talk about it in a family environment where it becomes more of an open conversation than something that's hidden? Is that something that would be something we could put in as parents?
Yes. Well, I had good parents. Parents who really protected me as good as they could, and still they could not protect me from getting molested and sexually harassed.
Okay.
They couldn't protect me from that no matter how much they tried.
Wow. Okay.
I didn't see it coming. But I was 12 and I had no idea what was going on. I was afraid because I thought it was my fault. I didn't know what he was doing, why he was touching me. I just knew I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Which means this should be age-appropriate dinner conversation. Maybe not dinner conversation, but open conversation about, okay, the right and wrong ways of a touch. If someone touches you and says, don't tell your parents, you better come and tell us.
Yeah.
Because we will take care of it. If he threatens you that he would hurt us, don't believe him. Even if it's a family member. The thing is, when it's a family member, as parents, we don't want to believe it. So the first words out of a parent's mouth usually is, I don't believe you. Even though when they think about it later, they say, wait a minute, there were signs, but the damage has already been done.
Right.
This, I don't believe you, will be stuck with your child forever. So yes, as parents, we can really educate ourselves, how we can educate our children, that they know when something like this happens, what to do, where to go, right? Not holding this back, being honest about it. That's what I do with my son. And sometimes he's still a little uncomfortable when something happened in school, and I don't know, should I tell you? He's asking me if he should tell me. I was like, yeah, better tell me. But
Yeah.
he comes to me, even though it's uncomfortable, and I encourage that, and so does my husband. But sadly, it's only when you've been through your own trauma that you actually are aware enough to help your children, to empower your children. If you never have been sexually assaulted, you wouldn't even dream of doing that for your children. Because you think it didn't happen to me, so why would it happen to my children? My parents thought that. And see what happened. So yes, there are ways where we can empower our children, especially that always come to us with whatever they have.
And then I guess as parents, being open and sharing our story with our children.
In bite-sized pieces.
In bite-sized pieces, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Because the one thing is, I don't want to glorify a trauma in the sense where it becomes all I think about, dream and deal with every day, right? But at the same time, I don't want to hide that, which could help someone. So there's a balance between,
yes,
right, the two, and I'm trying to strike that balance and what's healthy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There was one thing with my son in school not too long ago where he got in trouble. He was with a couple of other friends peeking over the bathroom stall, and another boy was using the bathroom, and they asked to see his private parts, and he got in trouble for that. Now, I got an email from the teacher, and I sat down and talked to my son about it. I didn't scold him. I wasn't angry. I said, look, I know this was just meant to be a joke. I get that. But have you ever wondered how the other boy feels? And he was like, no. I was like, well, let me tell you, this happened to me when I was a kid. That I was that boy, right? Sitting on the toilet, and some other kids just peeked over, and it made me feel very uncomfortable.
Wow. Yeah.
And that changed the whole perspective of my son. And he was like, well, how can I fix it? I was like, well, you apologize. You go to the school, go to the kid, and you apologize. And that's it. You understand you did something wrong, you own what you did wrong, and you apologize. And he did. So I did not punish him, I did not yell at him, I did not call him a bad child. I explained to him the whole situation. That's how kids grow. That's how kids get stronger. That's how they start to think twice before they do something, because they learn to be compassionate and think about what the other person may feel if they did this.
Right. So we're going to talk a little bit more, and your book definitely lays out how someone works through trauma, lives through trauma, and you've given great resources in your book, fabulous resources. But there's, on top of that, before we go there, you mentioned that you're also working on something for the family members or the people who are there to support people who have trauma in their life. And you're coming up with a program, a course, something to help people. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that, I think, we'll come back to someone with trauma specifically, but those that are supporting others with trauma. How is this new thing you're working on going to help?
Well, when we talk about trauma, we always talk about what happened, right? We talk about a person who's traumatized.
Yeah.
But there is not many resources for people who live with people with trauma.
Right.
Like I said before, like the intimacy issues.
Yeah.
Intimacy after trauma. That's an online course that I'm building specifically for partners so that they can understand and learn what really happens in the moment when there's a trigger. Why there are intimacy triggers. And then which active role they can play in helping their partner through it. You know, understanding, like I said before, that it's not about them, even though it may feel like it. That their partner who's traumatized is just as frustrated with themselves. And they wish they could just get over it. But that's just not how this works. But as a partner, there's so many things they can do to help, to be, empowered to help them heal. It's not just, you can heal trauma without therapy. You can heal trauma without me, right? But you need to know the steps. And if you have a partner who is enlightened enough to understand what has to happen. And I mean, I used to have intimacy issues with my husband because I was still traumatized, but he without realizing it did the right things to make me feel comfortable that if I said no, it's okay. He wouldn't push. Right? Things like that. But not everybody is aware enough of that to realize that it's not just, I don't really want to, that it's really a trigger. Right? Sometimes we're so in the moment already that it's hard to think clearly and stop. Right? Sometimes this happens, but this may feel the other partner they're getting close to rape because they're saying no over and over and over again. Yeah. And so to understand that and that this is just temporary, because the more their partner feels in control, that they're being heard when they say no, no matter at what point you are in the act of lovemaking, gives them the control back that they need. And this helps them to release the trigger. Right. Once and for all. I don't have issues anymore. Yeah. Ever. I don't get triggered. This is completely done and released and everything because my husband was very proactive in helping me. See. Right? There, yeah. So, and this is what I built this online course for, so that they really understand the steps they can take. And of course, talking about it. Right. Shifting, from not talking about sex, figuring out what their partner actually likes. Right? I mean, we all love to have sex, but no one likes to talk about it. Yeah, exactly. Right. Right? Yeah. But this should be a normal conversation. You want to make your partner happy. You want to pleasure your partner. Well, then ask how he or she likes to be pleasured. Yeah. I mean, this shouldn't be like a big puzzle. Right. And things like that is what I do in my course to make it really easy to understand what happens and what has to happen to help and how this can completely transform the relationship on all levels. So as much as I love working with trauma survivors and help them release the trauma, I also now want to focus on the family or the partners of the trauma survivors to empower them to play a key role in their healing journey. Because I don't think there's many resources out there for partners and family members how to really actively help.
No.
And that's what I want to change.
Nice. I love it. So then people can come to your website for that. That's going to be the first point of contact.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So we'll definitely have the links in the show notes to the website and more information on that as well. So I admire you for creating this, because it's going to help many people, to understand, right, and to be more attentive in their relationships, right,
Exactly.
without feeling like a victim themselves.
Yes,
And
because that can
hopeless.
easily happen.
Right? Yeah, that can happen for sure. So, as a resource for people living with someone with trauma, your book also has pages and pages of resources for people specifically surviving trauma. Is there anything from the book that you find seems to be some of the more common or more effective things that you've seen used for people surviving trauma? Because there's a lot in here. There's a lot of great stuff. Is there certain things that you try first with people to kind of start them out as using the resources from the book?
Well, it's very difficult to pinpoint just one or two because everybody's different.
Right. Yeah.
Which is why I have, general therapeutic stuff, and I also have spirituality like the chakras and meditation and Reiki and crystals, because everybody is drawn to something different.
Okay.
So the first thing that I do is have a free consultation with my clients and figure out what they're open to doing. And then I build the program around which sessions to use and how to approach this and how to branch out. And whenever I work with a client, it's always individual to them.
Okay. Yeah, because that can be overwhelming, right? When you're looking at this and you're like, well, where do I start? And I love that you actually call it out, like, okay, here's where we're going to start. And that's great. So talk a little bit then about how the book directly relates to time with you. Is it important for somebody who comes to work with you, Sandra, that they read the book first? Or do you prefer to talk to them while they're reading the book? What seems to work best?
Well, no, it's not necessary to read the book before working with me.
Okay.
Some people did. That's how they found me. And some read it while they work with me because then they hear about it.
Yeah.
So, no, it doesn't really matter.
Okay. Because just sometimes there's coaches that really want you to understand their story and come with knowledge, and then let's work through it together. So I like that you have that open door for people to come and work with you right away. So tell me more about, again, the response from the book as well. I'm reading all the great shout outs on the back of the book from people that have worked with you and know your work. Can you tell me a little bit of the response you've had from readers and what that's meant for you as an author?
Well, something that I've heard several times now is that my readers say the book grows with them, which means the first time they read the book, they may be triggered by how raw it is and how honest I am and direct. I mean, there's one part where I explain to you in detail how it feels to be actually raped, what happens in the body. Right? That's very raw, but it needs to be explained to show that there's actually a physical sensation going on that is horrible. But anyways.
Yeah.
So, and then they say that as they go on with their healing journey and they read the book again, so many things all of a sudden make sense to them in a completely different way.
Right.
So this is a book that grows with you. So whenever you read it again, there's something new you pick up and it just makes sense. I know that one of my friends, she read the book and she's like, this book is going wherever I'm going. She's like, without it, I'm naked. And she says it took her to read it 10 times to understand the emotional hangover. And this is so important, to really understand what that means, because this is something I will always say after every session. Remember your emotional hangover. It's probably going to come in a couple of days because it's so common, so normal, but we don't realize what's going on. We just feel crappy and don't know why.
Yeah. There's a lot to process. There's a lot to work through. And that's why having the book, and again, I usually ask my authors to hold up the book, but I get to do it. There's so much great stuff here in Journey to Yourself. And again, my wife and I are enjoying reading this and going through this, having conversations around it. And again, to have it in our home is great. We really do appreciate the fact that you made this available to us and to the listeners as well. So, Sandra, the best way then for people to get the book and get their hands on a copy like I have, is it through your website? Where should we go to get our copy?
Well, you can go through my website, or you can go directly to Amazon. I have it there too. But if you like a signed copy, then yes, definitely from my website.
Awesome. Yeah. And mine is autographed as well. So I'm so happy. Sandra, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. And
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for writing a book that helps people, creates the conversation, and not only creates a conversation, but gives the resources to survive. And your story is powerful. And I know that there's people listening to this that really do need your help. And I hope that this podcast opens the door for them to make the connection with you, get the book, and then work with you directly, because I think you can help so many people. And I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast.
Thank you.
And thank
Can
you.
I ask for a little favor?
Sure, I would love it.
Would you go to the acknowledgement and read the very last paragraph?
Going there. I'm going there. Wait. There I am. Wait a minute. I will make this sound better in the edit, I promise. There we go. Very last paragraph.
Yes.
There we go. I'm giving a shout out, that part. There we go. I'm giving a shout out to all those individuals who let me down, bullied, threatened, manipulated, humiliated, and abused me. It is because of your violation of my body, mind, and spirit that I discovered a strength and resilience I never knew I had. You instilled a darkness within me that helped me discover my light. Wow. Let it be known far and wide. I choose to thrive, not despite of what you did, but because of it.
That's trauma healing.
Wow. I'm going to make sure that's in the show notes, because I want people to read that along with me as they hear it as well. That's it right there.
Thank you. And I meant every word.
Those are words that are hard to write, probably harder to live. No.
Once you get to a certain point,
yes,
your story that has no control over you anymore. And once you're there, you're free.
And I think maybe it's harder to live if you don't have the help. And I think you can help a lot of people. So thank you for writing this.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Everyone, please go to the show notes and check it out. Sandra, thank you so much for the book. And thank you for all that you do to help people and for your story.
No, it's my pleasure.
Excellent.
I honestly can't imagine doing anything else than what I do.
You have a calling, and that's great. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for being here on Living the Next Chapter. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We enjoyed having you here on the podcast. Our authors are amazing. I hope you appreciate their time, their effort to make this possible. If you know an author, if you want to recommend an author That's a good idea. Hey, if there's an author that you really would love to hear about or hear from, if you tell me, if you send me a message, you speak pipe on our website, livingthenextchapter.com, send me an email, go over to livingthenextchapter.com, send us a message. We will forward your message to that author and say, listen, you are being requested to be on Living the Next Chapter. Our audience can't wait to hear from you. You can help shape the show. Yeah, you. You could do that right now, actually. You got a minute, right? Okay, how about you do that? livingthenextchapter.com. I'll see you over there. Recommend an author. Yeah. See ya. Thanks.